In January 2013, a young woman checked into a hotel in downtown Los Angeles. Within weeks, she would be found dead in a place that should have been impossible to reach without being seen. The circumstances surrounding her death would be recorded, analyzed, debated, and replayed millions of times across the internet. Yet despite all of that scrutiny, the core question would remain unchanged. How did she get there? And what exactly happened inside the hotel before she died? This is the case of Elisa Lam. Elisa Lam was a 21-year-old Canadian student from Vancouver. She was enrolled at the University of British Columbia and was described by those who knew her as quiet, thoughtful, and deeply introspective. Like many young adults, she was navigating independence, academics, and personal challenges while living away from home. In early 2013, Elisa traveled alone to California. It was not her first solo trip, and it was not initially unusual. She was staying in Los Angeles for a short period, and she checked into the Cecil Hotel, a budget accommodation in downtown LA with a long and complicated history. The hotel had been associated over the years with crime, death, and transient populations. However, it remained operational, catering to travelers seeking inexpensive lodging in a central location. Elisa checked into the hotel in early January. At first, nothing about her stay appeared unusual. She communicated with her family by phone during the early part of her trip. She visited local attractions and moved through the city like any other tourist. But within days, something began to change. Her family reported that contact with her became inconsistent. Messages slowed. Her responses became unclear. Eventually, communication stopped entirely. By the end of January, concern had escalated enough that she was reported missing. The investigation into her disappearance began at the Cecil Hotel. Detectives reviewed hotel access records, interviewed staff, and began searching the building. Nothing immediately suggested where she had gone. Then investigators obtained surveillance footage from one of the hotel's elevators. The footage would become one of the most widely circulated pieces of video in modern true crime history. It shows Elisa Lam entering the elevator alone. She appears to behave in a way that many later described as unusual or erratic. She presses multiple floor buttons. She steps in and out of the elevator repeatedly. She moves to the corner, then to the hallway, as if reacting to something outside the frame. At times, she gestures with her hands in a way that appears as though she is addressing someone or something not visible on camera. The elevator doors remain open for an unusually long period. Elisa continues to move in and out of the elevator space before eventually leaving the frame. After this point, she is not seen again alive. The footage raised immediate questions during the investigation. However, law enforcement did not treat it as evidence of a crime by itself. Instead, it became one of many pieces in a broader effort to locate her. A full search of the hotel began in earnest.
This is the last known sighting of her.
Officers and investigators checked guest rooms, stairwells, hallways, and restricted areas. Dogs were brought in. Nothing suggested an obvious place where Elisa could have been concealed. As days passed, the search expanded beyond the hotel interior. Still, no trace of her was found. Meanwhile, guests at the Cecil Hotel began reporting something else. Some mentioned irregular water pressure. Others complained about discoloration or unusual taste in the water supply. At the time, these reports were treated as maintenance issues, not as potential indicators of a larger problem. The investigation continued without answers. Then on February 19, 2013, nearly 3 weeks after Elisa had been reported missing, a hotel maintenance worker was checking the rooftop water system. What he discovered changed the entire direction of the case. Inside one of the hotel's large water tanks was a body. It was Elisa Lam. The tank was located on the roof of the Cecil Hotel. It was one of several large cylindrical reservoirs used to supply water to guest rooms. The tanks were elevated, heavy, and not easily accessible without climbing equipment or internal ladders. When authorities arrived, they confirmed the identity of the body. The condition of the scene made recovery difficult, and investigators carefully documented the area before removing her remains. Immediately, questions emerged about how she could have entered the tank in the first place. Access to the rooftop required passing through secured doors. From there, reaching the water tanks required additional climbing. The lids of the tanks were heavy and typically closed. Investigators determined that the lid of one tank was open at the time of discovery, but whether it had been closed previously or how long it had been open remained unclear. The autopsy was conducted by the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner coroner. The results provided clarity on some aspects of the case but left others unresolved. The official cause of death was ruled as accidental drowning. No evidence of physical trauma consistent with assault was found. There were no clear indications of sexual assault. Toxicology reports did not reveal substances that would suggest overdose or incapacitation by drugs or alcohol at the time of death. However, the report also noted a significant factor in the case. Elisa had a documented history of bipolar disorder. She was prescribed medication for her condition, though it was not confirmed whether she was consistently taking it during her trip. The coroner concluded that her condition may have played a role in her behavior prior to her death, but this was not classified as a contributing cause of death in a direct mechanical sense. The final ruling remained accidental drowning. Despite the official conclusion, the case did not settle in public perception. The elevator footage became the focal point of widespread speculation. Online viewers analyzed her movements frame by frame. Some interpreted her behavior as a psychological episode. Others suggested she may have been reacting to someone outside the camera's view. The lack of audio and limited camera angle only intensified uncertainty. However, investigators did not find evidence of another person involved in the elevator scene or in the hotel during that time frame that would support a physical confrontation theory. The Cecil Hotel itself also became part of the narrative. Its long history of violent incidents and deaths led many to associate the environment with the mystery. Yet investigators maintain that no direct evidence linked the hotel's history to Elisa's death. One of the most persistent questions in the case remained logistical. How did she reach the roof without being seen? And how did she enter the water tank? Security footage from the hotel showed no clear evidence of another person accompanying her to the roof. There were gaps in surveillance coverage in certain areas, which left portions of her movements unrecorded. This absence of continuous footage contributed to lingering uncertainty. Investigators ultimately reconstructed a possible sequence. Elisa accessed the roof alone, reached the water tanks, and somehow entered one of them, leading to accidental drowning. The exact mechanics of how she entered the tank were never fully confirmed, largely due to the physical difficulty of accessing the interior from the outside. As the investigation closed, no criminal charges were filed. No suspects were identified, no evidence of homicide was established. Legally, the case ended as an accidental death. But in public discourse, it remained open. The combination of surveillance footage, the unusual location of her body, and the history of the hotel ensured that the case would continue to be analyzed long after official findings were released. Over time, professionals and investigators emphasized a more grounded interpretation. A young woman with a documented mental health condition experiencing a severe episode, leading to disoriented behavior and ultimately accidental drowning in an inaccessible water tank. Still, the absence of definitive clarity in certain moments of the timeline ensured that the case would retain its place in modern true crime history. Today, the death of Elisa Lam stands as one of the most studied cases of the digital age. It is a case defined not by a lack of investigation, but by the limitations of interpretation when incomplete visual data intersects with public speculation. The facts remain fixed: a young traveler, a historic hotel, a disappearance, a rooftop water tank, and a final ruling of accidental drowning. Yet the questions that arose from those facts continue to echo. And in that space between evidence and uncertainty, the case of Elisa Lam endures.